electric vehicle sales continue to grow, and car makers are committing more and more investment and resources to the next generation of mobility. But how ready is vehicle logistics and the distribution models that we have today? So conservative forecasts indicate that production of pure EVs will account for 25% of production in North America by 2029. And just by a show of hands, just in the room, just want to gauge whether there's an appreciation for this, there's a ready for this. So if you're preparing for 25% or less by 2029, by the end of the decade, can you just raise your hands? Okay, no hands that I can see. So who's preparing for more? Hopefully there'll be a few hands. Okay, 5 people. Is anyone preparing for electric vehicles at all? Okay, I'm in the wrong room, so. Okay, well maybe the next 35 minutes or so might change your minds. So here to talk through some of those challenges and some of the impacts that electric vehicles might have and will have on vehicle logistics, we have Charles Franklin, Senior National Manager of Business Development at Glovis America, and Zach Jennings, CEO of Chargie. And Chargie are an EV charging station manufacturer. And Charles, I think you know pretty much everyone in the room, so you don't get an intro. So let's crack on and get straight into it. So my question to the audience, which fell a little flat, but my question to you, is the vehicle logistics network ready for mass electrification?
No, absolutely not. In fact, we had our vendor conference just a few months ago where we had all the rail carriers, port processors, auto haulers in the room much like this, and I said, okay, how many of you are ready for influx, and I'm talking about next year, so I'm not talking about several years, where based on the customers I'm working with, I'm estimating anywhere from, by the end of the year, 250 to 500,000 units that will be crossing our ports, either in or out. And I said in the room, how many of you are ready for that? And just like your question, nobody raised their hand. And the challenge with that is they are coming. I mean, I have the forecast, I'm working on contracts, and we're not ready by any means.
Okay, great. So we do have a session. That's excellent. If you'd also said, yes, we're ready, then I'd have had to shut up. So, Zach, for those who don't know Chargie, perhaps you can share a little bit of detail about your story, your journey, and why you're part of this panel.
Yeah, so we're a turnkey operator of EV charging infrastructure. We do everything from the start, from design, engineering, permitting, installation. We have our own software, so we are one single point of contact. So what we specialize in is, working with the customer to move forward with the entire process, including rebates and incentives to lower the actual investment to get those chargers installed. So we primarily work, a bulk of our work has been with multifamily buildings, commercial, and then also some work at ports and logistics centers.
Great, thank you. And so Charles, you're working with clearly a number of OEMs, existing players, new EV players as well, those existing players transitioning from ICE to EVs. At the simplest level, is it not just moving vehicles from A to B?
Well, what I'm looking at now, and that's even how I was introduced to Zach, is we're seeing about, okay, who's putting these vehicles through the ports, both inbound and outbound. And you have various, one of our problems is in trying to estimate our investment. All of these car carriers have different states of charge that they ship the vehicles. But also with the new, as everybody's been saying most of this day, Amazon model, where a lot of these dealers want to, or OEMs want to deliver directly to the consumer, then they want these vehicles to leave the port fully charged. And so in the meeting just last week we had, and I'm sorry I laughed, but you laughed, some of you guys in the room will laugh as well. They said they want us to process 150 cars a day, which sounds like a small number, but they want us to charge them to 100%. So that's 3.5 to 4 hours per vehicle per day. I mean, and ports, you don't have that much time. And so that's if you use the level 2 charger, which his people educated me. If I did a level 3, yes, I could do them faster, But then now you might blow up the grid, so you don't even know if your port can support those level 3 chargers. Number one, and a level 3 charger costs 10 times more than a level 2 charger. And for the OEMs in the room, you know, if I ask you, can I raise your rates 2 cents, you usually want to cut my head off. So if I tell you I need to raise your rates enough to pay for these chargers, it's not going to work. Lastly, if I take the level 2s and I want to process that many vehicles fastly, now I have to do this charger farm. So not only talking about the investment, but now you're talking about real estate. And I don't want to take up that much land to charge your cars. So it's an interesting dilemma right now. We're trying to figure it out, and that's why we're talking to folks like Zach.
Yeah, and Zach, just on that, Charles, you alluded to some of the different kind of charging options, but Zach, maybe you can go into that in a little bit more detail. You know, what is currently available to market in terms of charging, and we're talking about on a commercial level here. How do the different models vary? Is there a vehicle to charging station ratio that you're working to, that there are guidelines out there? What are you seeing?
So they've broken the chargers, at least in America, into 3 different levels. Level 1 is considered just plugging into a household outlet. You know, from 0 to a full battery can be anywhere from 60 to 100 hours. It's a very slow charge. Level 2 is a good middle ground. That's where you're looking at being able to charge a vehicle within approximately 10 hours. And those chargers are basically a relay. The actual vehicle has the inverter and does the charging and controls itself. The level 2 charger is more or less an outlet that passes the power to the vehicle with a little bit of computing power to collect data. When you get up to level 3, those are like the Tesla Supercharger Network, EV Go, those things you see on the side of freeways. Those are incredibly powerful. Those can charge a vehicle in under an hour. The downside to those is that they're upwards of $100,000 per unit for the charger, let alone the infrastructure it takes to actually power those. So when you start looking at that infrastructure cost plus the actual charging hardware, you get into a very expensive installation, and then you're getting in a game because it's such an expensive unit itself. You want to keep cars utilizing it, so you're always having to move and make sure people aren't hogging the spot or staying there too long. So it really comes down to a balance of, you know, do you want to put most of them level 2s and then do a level 3? But if you do all level 3s, that cost adds up quick. And when it comes to a ratio, obviously we work with our customers to figure out what makes most sense for that property and the use case. For example, in multifamily buildings for apartments, we normally do about 20%. That's a good ratio, at least to start for now, with the obvious idea that it will expand as utilization goes up and there's more EVs in that parking lot. But with every customer, you never know what they're going to need, so we try to maximize what we can get in there. And obviously use, and we'll get into this later, but incentives and rebates that are local to help bring that cost down.
Well, I mean, yeah, let's get into that now in terms of you know, the Biden administration has invested billions into the growth of electric vehicles. Is there a clear picture on how the sum will be allocated, maybe specifically with commercial EV infrastructure? And I saw that there was some news this morning supporting the non-commercial side in terms of charging stations around standardization there. But what's happening on the commercial side, and you know, specifically what would affect our audience here?
So we have actually a whole team of just government affairs that focuses on going to different areas and finding all these programs, because it does get incredibly complicated. We've had customers that try to take it on themselves and they don't maximize what was available, and you can actually stack a lot of these programs as well. So it goes all the way from utilities have their own programs up to state level and then obviously federal. And from the federal standpoint, most of what Biden administration is pushing through is targeting corridor charging, meaning when you're on a trip. So that would be those level 3 chargers you pull off, charge for 30 minutes, and get right back on the road. So we always work to figure out how we can work with all those programs to maximize what we can get for each customer. And a lot of the times, you can get 100% of that cost covered. So we always push and stress to our customers that you want to get those while they're available. It is a first come, first served basis on the most part. And once they're gone, they may renew them, but it's not a guarantee. So there's no reason to not get those things installed today and take advantage of that when the actual charging hardware isn't going to change much. The cables are standardized. There was a situation with Tesla back in 2012. The Society of Automotive Engineers did not develop a charging standard for the actual connector, so Tesla had to sell cars. They created their own. So that's why there's that little bit of difference between their connector and everybody else's. But since then, all other manufacturers have come together and agreed that the J1772 is the connector of choice for all electric vehicles. When you get to level 3, there were 2 options. Japan had a connector called a Chatimo, which is a round connector that Nissan and a couple other companies were using, and everyone in America and Europe were using a CCS combo charger cable. So as of recently, I think Nissan has and the Japanese companies have agreed to eliminate that standard, because that is the whole idea. You want to make sure that you're not putting double infrastructure to be able to handle 2 different types of vehicles when everyone could be using the same thing.
And looking at the other end, we've mentioned the ports already, but looking at the other end, on the dealership side, how do you see that market developing, that need, that growth for charging infrastructure there? I'll come to you again, and then Charles, I'll come to you on potential way the distribution models are changing in terms of that dealership model or direct deliveries perhaps, and the considerations there. But first to you, Zach, on that dealership side, what are you seeing from your customers, from the conversations you're having?
What it really comes down to is available power. A lot of dealerships don't want to spend that money and they don't have the power available, so it gets more expensive. But what we always recommend is you really want to look at how long is the dwell period or the time that vehicle is going to be parked. If it's going to be there for days, you do not need to worry about getting big level 3 chargers to blast power into those vehicles. Maybe you have one just so in emergencies or visitors can use that, but the idea is if those cars are going to be parked on the lot for a while, you get a lot of level 2 chargers, put those in, and then just let them trickle charge up. It's a much more cost-effective way, and it's easier on the grid, as we spoke about earlier.
Well, right now there's no cars on the grid on the lots as we're here, but obviously that will hopefully change, and the plans are for vehicle ramp-ups to happen. So again, interesting. Do you invest now for the short term or the long term, and hopefully there'll be stabilization? So Charles, but I'll come to you on that distribution model and how that might be impacting vehicle logistics specifically.
Well, selfishly, in regard to EVs, I love when dealerships have the power, because that means that I can receive that vehicle, process it, and get it out. So yes, there's a revenue opportunity for us to charge them, but we're more concerned, a port is a flow through. And so we're really concerned on how much that's going to bog us down, because as most, for my port processing friends in here, you're taking thousands, you get one vessel might have 3,000 cars. What happens when all 3,000 of those are EVs and all 3,000 of those need charging, and you now got another vessel coming in 2 days? I don't see how we can manage it, even if we had, look like a drive-in, for those of you as old as I am, when you used to have a drive-in theater and you pull up the speaker, even if your yard looked like that and you can hook them all up, you couldn't get 3,000 cars out in 2 days. It just couldn't happen. So I like the model for the dealerships such as them, because then we can process them, send them out, and let them top them off at the dealership. However, as we said, going back to the Amazon style, we have customers right now, it's a requirement. Actually, we have one customer we already have in place now. We have to do 80 to 100% charge before we deliver those cars. Right now, they're in their ramp up, so they're not getting a lot of cars, and we're able to handle it. But at the same time, when they start doing a high volume, we're trying to figure out how much we need to invest. And that's the scary part, because right now, at some of our ports, we have, it doesn't sound like many, 6 chargers. And if you go there right now, I promise you, 4 of them, there's nobody using them. And so if we spend all of this money and get 100 chargers or whatever number, and nobody's using them, what are we going to do? So our biggest challenge now is trying to do that estimation. So we're estimating what we're going to do. So we're talking to folks like this. We may even engage with Chargie and say, here's our business model, here's the power grid we're on, here's the forecasted volume, what's our infrastructure? And then speaking, again, selfishly as a processor, and anybody in who handles vehicles, OEMs will tell you, here's our forecast, and then they move that freight to another port. And now you got all these charging stations here. So we're working. We're going to make that solution. We're very flexible, but at the same time, we have to manage the investment versus the risk of that investment.
Yeah, absolutely. And, in terms of the ports investing in getting the right infrastructure in place, is that going to become a competitive advantage, a differentiator when we're selecting import and export routes and models like that?
I say yes and no. And the reason why I say that, most of the time, at least as we're talking about ocean transportation, the vessel, the origination of that freight and the destination of that freight is going to drive the port. And so therefore those ports that receive and or ship out those vehicles is going to have to upgrade. Now the question is, where's the cost? Who's going to do that? So right now, if we use the Tesla word, in a lot of instances, Tesla has provided those charging. But most of the customers I'm engaging with now are giving me requirements and asking me what's your charging capabilities, what's the plan, so they want me to invest. And then I saw my friend Donna, I can't see the lights, but she's on the port Huanimi. I said, so what are you guys going to invest? And so we're trying to figure out, and then naturally he says, well, there could be rebates, but there's limits to those rebates. So first somebody has to write that check before the rebate happens in hopes of a rebate. And then there's some limits to rebates depending upon how big your company is. If you're over a certain revenue peak, then you don't qualify for the rebate, and so you wrote this check, oh, I'm gonna get my money back, and they say, no, you're not. So it's, we're in the middle. We're gonna make it happen. Like I say, we're working with some customers, and then as my title alludes to, business development not only means sales, but it means developing partnerships and relationships to support our customers. And so when I talk to some of my other port processing friends, you'd be amazed at how some of the biggest ro-ro ports in America, there are zero chargers today.
Yeah.
So so I don't have an answer. I just know that we're studying it, and it scares me.
And I suppose while this landscape develops, it seems like there's a lot of people waiting, looking to see what others are doing, how the system can be worked. Is this potentially going to cause a huge bottleneck? And when suddenly the volumes do rise up and things aren't ready, things aren't in place, and then suddenly there's a drive for demand?
It could, and that's one of the discussions that I had with Chargie. I said, what's the lead time? Because let us say that I do decide to put in 100 units. So now I told him 10, and he said 6 to 12 weeks. But what if it's 100? Does that make it 6 to 12 months? And then that's one port. So what happens if all the ports? So I see the bottleneck. But hopefully, if I'm successful in securing all of these agreements, that once you get the ink, it's easy to get some green to follow that ink, and then we can start putting it in. So I think there will be a bottleneck, but I think the solution for that bottleneck is for the OEMs to determine their minimum stated charge. And right now, naturally, unfortunately, we had a fire, as you know, not Glovis, but the industry had a fire, which is causing a lot of people to look at EV shipment. But let's just say if everybody agrees, okay, it's 30 to 40%, okay, and they agree that that's sufficient for it to go, then again, now I don't need to invest because I'm going to receive that car and I'm going to send it out. And maybe I have one or two because, yeah, some of them will have a drain and they need to get charged. So we need to figure out what is the norm, and there's no norm today.
Yeah, I just want to pick up on that point on the minimum standard charge for vehicles. There's a lot of handovers, a lot of milestones within the vehicle delivery network. But you're saying that that's not standardized what the level of charge should be. And presumably each stakeholder would want to minimize their own costs, their own charging time, their own dwell time at their own compounds or parts of the chain. So how do you, this can cause a problem where vehicles are arriving less than standard charge. It creates a bottleneck that hasn't been predicted, hasn't been seen, and right now we know that getting vehicles to market is at speed is critical. So again, what needs to happen to either create this standardization or where does the responsibility lie to ensure that the network flows smoothly?
And again, as most of you know, I've sat on both sides of the fence. For 20 years I was OEM, and now I'm a service provider. I put it on the OEM, and the reason being is, yes, they want to minimize their costs and to dwell on the compounds in the yard, but it's just like anything. All ports are ocean property, so just like real estate, that's the most expensive property in the world. Okay, so I'm gonna charge you more for consuming my real estate than I am for the juice that I'm gonna charge you. The real estate as well as the infrastructure to charge it. So it would be much more friendly to the system and to their pocketbooks if they send those cars out with a charge enough to get it to its final destination, because then I can treat it just like an ICE vehicle. I receive it, I process it, I put it on a truck, train, or wherever I want it to go, and it's out. You do not want any vehicles dwelling at the port any longer than they have to, because it's just like your vacation. If you stay in this hotel more than 7 days, or do you stay in it one day, it's going to cost you a big difference because it's on the beach. So you got to move them, I believe.
That's a great point. Zach, we've spoken a lot about the infrastructure, but are there also concerns about energy sources? Is there capacity to deal with this projections, be it current or future projections of this demand? Everyone charging at the same time, commercial businesses operating at the same time, truck drivers looking to be at home overnight, so not wanting to charge during the day, but charge all at the same time. Is the grid going to be able to cope? What's happening there?
So our previous company we actually spun out of was based in Los Angeles, a large-scale solar provider for commercial solar, so solar farms, warehouses, airport hangars. So we understand the way electricity grid works, demand and all those aspects. And really what it comes down to, it's not about available power. There is enough power in the grid. The grid can produce massive amounts of power. What it comes down to is, just like you're saying, is the time that those peaks happen. When it's ebbs and flows or valleys and mountains that you're looking at, you really want to be able to shave the top off, because the way the utilities look at it is, if we have to provide you energy at this very peak, we're going to charge you extra for it because we need to supply that capacity. And by having all this down period of these power plants that only need to supply at this short amount of time, it creates a huge issue. So what it really comes down to, at least depending on the use case, is energy load management, where you can have those vehicles, okay, there's a 2-hour window, there's going to be a massive peak, and time of use pricing is very common with utilities. You pay based on the time of day. The peak periods are more expensive. With the technology we have, is you can actually have those chargers automatically slow down at those peaks if available. Obviously, if you have to get it charged, you just keep it going. But if you can, you lower the charge rates at that time and then kick them right back up automatically to avoid those peak periods. From an economic standpoint, you can be paying double, even triple the cost in those peaks. So by just slowing it down for a few hours and kicking it right back up, you don't lose much time and you save a lot of money. So that's really what it comes down to, is the sophistication, the algorithms to help stabilize the grid and kind of flatten it out more. And when it gets real advanced and you have super big loads and you can justify it, you can add battery buffers that will then kick in. Those batteries will be storage devices that can supply the power to the vehicles for those peaks, and that with the cost difference, the delta, you can actually economically make that work out as well. And there are incentives for battery storage.
So beyond the charging function, we're getting into smart charging networks. How can that not only help the grid, but how can that also have an impact on logistics as well, in terms of yard management, vehicle logistics movements? How can that support?
So we're in a world nowadays of data. Data is everything. So collecting that data, analyzing it, and using it appropriately is what becomes very important in those situations. You want to make sure that you understand what is happening with every vehicle on that lot, what their state of charge is, and how long they've been going for. And then at the end of it, you want to be able to have notifications those vehicles are finished, so you know that you can move them. You don't want to have to send an employee to walk around and check the screens on every vehicle to see the status. So by having the data through the charger side, you have a centralized command station. You look at one pane of glass that is able to tell you all this information. Hey, these 6 cars are all finished. Send someone to go pull those out and put new ones in those locations. So that's where really it comes down to. And to get that, you need to have reliable communication. You need to have hardware that works every time, all the time, and then you need to have redundancies behind that. So for example, a lot of our systems have either dual modems or at least dual SIM cards, so if for some, or we connect to the local network, but we always put redundancies in place. So if something does go down, it fails over and keeps going. You do not want to be in a situation, especially with critical real estate, where you have devices or cars that are stranded because something on the chargers went down. So especially time is money in that situation.
In terms of, we've talked a lot about data, the need for greater transparency, greater sharing. A question I've asked before, but I'll put it to you guys, and Charles, maybe to you. Is the framework there for data sharing in a non-commercial setting? Is there a secured network? Are there things in place? And is there a level of acceptance and comfortability for data sharing to happen to really maximize the potential here?
That's what Zach's team tells me. So internally, do we currently have the data to support managing what he just said? Heck no. And that's why, again, going back to the developing partnerships with people, I believe in letting experts do what they do, because we're expert in moving vehicles and moving freight, and so we want to find partners that can support that. And so I don't see us developing or designing an EV charging network database, but I'm sure, as we said earlier, they said earlier today, through via API or EDI or whatever, we can interface with his system and transfer that information to our customers, and equally as important, to our transportation partners, because you don't want a truck driver to show up for his load and half of them are still charging because he or she wants to load them up and get out of there, which goes back to my initial point. If they have enough juice, just let them go. And it's interesting, even with the consultation that we do with some of our customers who say, I want this car to get to them full because it's brand new, it's going to their doorstep. And I said, yeah, but consider this. Ask your customer, would they rather get their car tomorrow with a 35% charge, or a week from tomorrow, full, and an additional $150 delivery fee? I said, most of us would say, give me my car tomorrow and give me a $50 or $60 gift card, and I'll be happy to give my car. So again, I think the OEMs have to figure out what their business model is, what the consumer demand is, and we're flexible. I'll do whatever you want. I'll charge them up, and I'll charge you for that charging them up, and we'll deliver them. But I think the industry, as well as it, just needs to figure out what does the customer truly want, and consider the impact of what they're asking is on the supply chain.
Looking at some of the key trends coming out of electric vehicles, we're seeing heavier weights, lower ground clearances, larger dimensions versus traditional ICE vehicles. Is road and rail equipment currently in use, essentially fit for purpose?
No.
Right? Oh, there you go.
100% no. So in fact, we won't say names, but we have a partnership with a very prominent EV manufacturer. And one of our first engagement with them, I said, is your car shippable? And it was very unique because, as alluded to in other sessions, logistics is the red-headed stepchild of the automobile OEM family, so nobody considered about shipping it. They want to see how aerodynamic it is, how fast it can go, how pretty it's going to be, and they finish and they say, here. And I said, well, and they said, what do you mean is it shippable? So we actually took their unit to one of our ports. We had 6 different auto haulers. We had 3 rail car designs, and we had a vessel. And so we spent 2 days just unloading, unloading. Only 2 of the auto haulers could the vehicle be loaded on. And of those 2, not all positions because of the lowness of the vehicle. Only 1 rail car could accommodate that vehicle. And then with these new EV cars, they're also wider. So the rail cars, and they're wider with 22-inch rims. And so we're saying, we're going to be eating wheels because they're going to be dinged up. And so, and what I share with them when I say it's shippable, if you can only ship your car on 1 or 2 types of trucks, 1 type of rail car, a couple of things happen. Number 1, your costs go up, okay? And then also the frequency of your shipment goes down, because if that rail car is not available, or if that particular truck trailer is not available, your car is not shipping. So there needs to be, now I think the industry will catch up where they'll remodel the auto hauler trailers, they're going to redesign the rail cars, but that's a lot of money, and that's a lot of, just look at the rail cars. I don't even know how many thousand of those are. So, and then the other piece of that, both for rail and truck, is the weight that you mentioned to. So right now, the rail calculates their fuel costs based on the load factor of that weight. That's going to change that model, and right now it's probably going to be applied across all models of cars, be it electric or gas, because how do they even know what's coming through? They're going to say, hey, I'm taking 10,000 cars or what have you. Particularly with the auto haulers, it's 80,000 pound limit. Okay, so some of these babies are almost 6,000 pounds. So now you're reducing so we already have a shortage of trucks. And now you're telling me I can't fill them up because the load factor is too heavy. So now it's going to be a greater shortage of trucks. And everybody says they're petitioning for the government to increase the weight of these vehicles. And I paid my way through college building bridges and working for the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation. I don't see the states approving heavier vehicles because it's going to trash the roads faster. Yeah. And so I don't know the solution, but it's going to be an impact on the supply chain. The weight as well as the electrification is going to have an impact pretty quickly.
So clearly there's a need for collaboration, stakeholders to come together to work through this. But just sticking with you, Charles, what are Glovis doing then with your own fleets in terms of investment and upgrading equipment to prepare and ready for this?
We are ordering, we're ordering and working on getting redesigned auto hauler trailers. But again, just like everything else, even if you want regular trailers, it's just a shortage of everything. So getting them is going to be slow, as well as recuperating the cost. Because again, from my OEM side, if I had to raise the cost per unit 25 cents, I almost had to write a paper. And so somebody's going to have to pay for those trailers. But we are doing it, but it's going to be slow. And again, we're also doing it, particularly with the new startups and the new OEMs, is right out the gate as I'm asking that same question, is this car shippable? So that hopefully before they do their finalization of their design, they have their car adjusted to meet the current equipment here to move their vehicles. So I think it's a partnership, and I think just like Kevin said earlier, it's becoming more of an enterprise. Before, logistics, like I said, we built it, get it there. Now they're listening to us more because I can get it there, but how much do you want to pay? How slow do you want to be? And what do you want your damage ratio to be? And so, so we're working with our customers as well with our suppliers to try to meet that. And again, though, going back to what's the standard? So what's the standard height? What's the standard width? Because you want to make this investment, and then all of a sudden, the color is no longer red, it's green, and now the stuff you just bought doesn't work. So it's going to be interesting.
Coming to you, you mentioned and touched upon automation earlier, and there's some potential there. I want to delve just a little bit deeper on that. With charging vehicles is still a manual process in itself currently. Is there scope for automation, be it at the ports, at dealerships? What sort of roadmap do you foresee playing a part? And I've done some research and found that there's companies exploring wireless technology and wireless charging, inductive charging systems. Is this part of Chargie's plans, or is this part of industry's plans? And what's the sort of timeline and roadmap looking like for that?
What it really comes down to is getting everyone to agree on a standard so that they can deploy this type of technology. Like you said, there is induction charging that hopefully will come up eventually. You pull up into a parking spot, you don't touch anything. There's a pad on your vehicle, pad underneath the concrete, and it just starts charging automatically. So that would be a perfect scenario. One of the big issues with that is the efficiency of that. You lose about 10%. And when you start looking at scale, losing 10% across all vehicles charging at any given time becomes a massive loss of energy. So they're continuing to advance it, but even when they do get it up to a high enough standard, it's going to be really getting everyone to agree that, okay, this is the pad you put on your vehicle, this is where you locate it, and this is the way it communicates. So that's where it really comes down to. Interoperability in general is becoming more and more of a question. If anyone has an EV, they would understand this, that a lot of cars exclude Tesla because theirs is all within their own network. But if you have, say, a Nissan Leaf, you go to a charger, you might not have a membership to that charger or an RFID tag. So most EV drivers, you open up their glove box, you'll see 5 or 6 membership cards because they're not interoperable. You need to be a member of all these different things. So the future, and this is where everything is starting to head to, is interoperability where you just have your vehicle, you plug it in. There's a standard called ISO 15118 where the vehicle can actually communicate to the charger through the plug to identify itself, authenticate, and move forward with charging. So it becomes a seamless process. That's where it really has to go. Similar to gas stations, you don't think about having a membership. You just tap your credit card and start putting gas in. It needs to be that simple. And there's a lot of people from the other side that push back and say that's never going to get corrected. How could it possibly be solved? But in the scheme of things, we're still in the infancy of EVs. It's just getting started. So in general, there's going to be a lot of development in the next 5-10 years as things scale up. And there will be some learning curves and some roadblocks, but I think everyone's motivated enough at this point, especially with the incentives and all the push to get clean vehicles out on the roads, that hopefully they can cut down the red tape and accelerate it and everyone can agree on a standard.
It's a pretty strong message there, and we're getting pretty close to time. So, sort of final question really is, we've covered a lot of ground, but what's the key piece of advice that you'd like our audience to kind of take away As we saw from my failed poll earlier, no one is preparing for electric vehicles here in this room. But what's the key piece of advice you can give to get them on that journey?
Well, piggybacking on Zach and some of the things I said before, I think there needs to be some standardization, some norms. And some of the standardizations don't really require any mega thought, okay? 35 or 40, and customer delivery is 35 or whatever. So if everybody agrees that we're going to ship them at this much, and this much is acceptable for the customer delivery, that gives us something that we can now calculate. He can help me figure out how many charges I need based on that information. But today we just don't know. And so we just need to have some standardization. Another potential solution is what they call battery as a service, which means you would buy the car and you lease the battery. But then that means that those batteries are interchangeable. But that would also fix the port process, because if a vehicle came in, and let's just say I know that 100 vehicles are coming in and they need to leave 100 state of charge, I can have 100 batteries here charging. When they come in, you swap them, it takes 5 minutes and they get out. But what that require? Standardization. Yes, it will require a big charging facility, but that's also a solution to what Biden's talking about, where they're saying if you drive across, if your battery is the least battery, you pull in and just boom, boom, 5 minutes, they swap it and you keep driving. So in all of those instances, standardization is the requirement.
Final comments?
I would say the main thing is to start preparing sooner than later. You can, right now with timing, keeping an eye on what the available incentives and rebates are is a great opportunity to get that infrastructure in either for free or at a low cost. So I would say the main thing is to not wait until it's absolutely necessary, but plan ahead so that when the time does come, you're ready for it.
Fantastic. So plenty of opportunities, plenty of information. So I want to say thank you very much to my panel, Charles Franklin, Zach Jennings.